So on this week of Hot Takes, we got somebody that decided to go completely off of the rails. We got a thread that just came out not too long ago. He says, I think Zouken is really unappreciated as a character. He was a really threatening presence throughout the whole Heaven's Field route. The moment he was introduced, he felt more intimidating than the other masters we've seen in the VN so far. Surely he isn't the most complex villain out there, but I think he was pretty great for the mid-boss of Heaven's Field. Not to mention, he was foreshadowed in both Fate and the UB-Dub routes, which made his arrival even more intriguing. By the way, if you haven't already, make sure you guys sign up for the Patreon. You get access to early content and priority on your requests. Can we truly say that Zouken is an unappreciated character? Now I want to start off by saying, you guys already know how I feel about villains. I'm already in the boat that I feel like villains don't get enough credit in general, because naturally they're the bad guy, everybody wants to see them go down. But honestly, I feel like villains are very important because they shape the story in a way that the protagonist can't. I mean, usually it's the hero bending around the villain, not the other way around, and trying to find ways that they can overcome them and adapt and grow out of their shell. The antagonist brings that out of them. In the case of Zouken, out of all the media I've seen, and I've mentioned this before, he's one of the villains that's out of sight, out of mind. So it's hard to necessarily pinpoint any type of emotion towards his character in general. Whether you like him, whether you dislike him, everything he does it from the shadows. So any type of feeling you might have had for him is probably gonna get shouldered onto another character, such as Sakura, and how a lot of people blame her, or Shinji, when really Shinji's entire life revolves around being a pawn for Zouken. So when it comes to the fact of him being appreciated as a character, to a degree, I would say yes, but I don't think that's the fault of the audience. I think that's just the nature of the way Zouken's character is written. I feel like he's a really well-written character. The way people feel about Zouken, it's almost like that's exactly what he wants. They don't feel any type of way against Zouken, it's everything around Zouken. Zouken hardly takes the blame. Like, just think about it. Usually people get on Zouken's ass only when you bring him up. You bring up Zouken's name and it's like, oh yeah, he is the one behind all of this. He is the one that conjured this up and is using everybody as chess pieces. Honestly, one thing that I've always loved about the way that Fate was written and how each route focuses on a certain set of characters is that each story becomes something that it wasn't before. So by the time that you get to Heaven's Field, you get to see the way that Zouken is really thinking. You get to see why he's doing the things that he's done, what's his ultimate goal, how is he pulling it off, and what's his entire point altogether. And that's around the point where you decide as an antagonist if you rock with Zouken's meaning. Now you guys know that Zouken fled from Russia and ended up meeting Justice, and he was brought into this journey of trying to recreate the third magic alongside her. But along the way, he got lost in the sauce. His soul started to degrade, his mental started to degrade, and all of a sudden it becomes less about recreating the third magic and making this perfect utopia that they were trying to achieve, very similar to what Amakusa was going to do in Apocrypha, and it becomes more about impressing Justice and more about, okay, I'm in too deep now, I gotta get something out of it. This is where you decide, can you still rock with Zouken knowing how far he's fallen mentally? And I feel like that's where a lot of the hate comes from. All of the things that he's done, the fact that he's preying on children, his own descendants, these random people to keep his body up, or literally anybody that decides to get in his way, especially with something as grotesque as the worm magecraft. That's where most people decide this dude is despicable. And usually there's some type of a line, or at least some type of a justification where a person could say, okay, I may not agree with what he's doing, but I at least understand it, and I at least understand why he's doing it. But Zouken is so far into the damned as a character that it gets to the point where you don't get what he's doing. Like, on one side, you feel nothing for his character at all. It's some of the most disgusting things in not just anime, but in media in general. Like, how many Zoukens can you go out and find as a villain or an antagonist. He's one of those select few, and his ends absolutely don't justify the means in any way. I just want to make that very clear. For me, I know a lot of people are real emotional about these things. I'm real logical about it. I do still think that he's a good character. I do still think that he's unappreciated, but this is a sick man. I'm one of the only people that made a video about Zouken on YouTube in general. That's how bad it is. And even under that video, you have some people saying, oh, well, if Zouken had some type of good energy around him, then he wouldn't have turned out this way. At a certain point, you have to take accountability for your actions. Some people want to forgive everybody for anything. It could be the lowest of the lowest deeds and acts that you can think of on this earth. Some people don't deserve to be forgiven. I'm gonna be completely honest with you. That's just what I think. There's some levels of vile that shouldn't be forgiven. There's no amount of you getting on your knees or you changing your life or you saying that I'm a new person that takes away from the despicable acts that you did. Not everybody, just at a certain level. I feel like Zouken has reached that level. People think that Shinji is the worst in the world. No. And I feel like Shinji falls victim to a lot of the things that Zouken put in his head, and in a way he ended up just like him and didn't even realize it. Of course, Shinji wasn't this amazing person to begin with, but he wasn't that mentally ill either. Zouken is truly mentally ill. He doesn't care how it gets done as long as it gets done. And he said this out of his own mouth to Irisville. I've come too far to turn back now. So when you see him at the end of Heaven's Field and he sees what he believes to be justice for the last time, and that's the last thing that flashes before his eyes, I personally felt nothing. I felt nothing at all. You get what you came for. You did all these people this type of a way, and I'm sure Zouken wasn't looking for anybody to feel sorry for him. It was his choice. We got choices, guys. He made his choice. He decided to go out and try to save the world and ended up becoming one of the worst monsters you can because of it. That's just what it is. He does serve as an excellent mid-boss. I do find the way that he weaved the story together and found a way to trick everybody, including the audience, into thinking everybody else is in the wrong but him, and making most of them take the hit. And I liken this to Kurisugu because a lot of people feel the exact same way about Kurisugu. Yeah, Kurisugu, his end goal was to save the world, but look at what he did on his way there. What he did on the way there doesn't justify him wanting to save the world. But here's the difference with Kurisugu and why most people are still willing to fight for him. Because he didn't lose his way. He didn't lose his humanity. When Angra showed him what actually would happen to the world if he tried to make his wish, he hit a complete U-turn. Isn't that something? The machine man with no feelings at all, no attachment to anything. Angra shows him that, and all of a sudden he becomes human again. And that's just one example. So no matter how bad you might feel about Kurisugu and the things that he's done, he didn't lose his humanity. If Angra showed Zouken that, and he did show Zouken that multiple times, Zouken doesn't care. He doesn't care how it turns out. And that's one of the key differences. There's no defending that. A lot of people love to blame Sakura and Shinji for the way that they turned out because of things that Zouken was doing the whole time and the way that he brought things together. Now granted, Shinji is pretty objectively evil. There's no way around it. But when I look at these children all together, I'm not blaming the children for the way that they turned out when their only example of being a human being is Zouken. How did you think they were going to turn out is the real question. And honestly, I do want to see Zouken before he got to that point, because I feel like that's one of the most interesting things in the story that's yet to be uncovered. We got a little glimpse of it in London in Grand Order, and they did nothing with it. Just so much wasted potential. A lot of people said London was trash. I'm like, do you know what they could do with this? Are you kidding me? There's so many characters that have avenues that don't get explored because Nasu has to get his point across. He only has so much time to do a certain thing with particular characters before the story is all over the place. So naturally, everybody isn't gonna get to say their piece. We don't know how Zouken was before he got to this point. All we know is that he wasn't as bad of a person as he is now. We don't even necessarily know if he was a good person. For all I know, he could have just wanted to save the world to get that Justice booty? I don't know. I and everybody else in the community would be lying if we said we did. They never tell us that much. Things like him fleeing from Russia. I don't know what Zouken was doing in Russia. For all I know, he could have been running a criminal syndicate. So there's a lot of details that are still left uncovered for his character that need to be exposed before we even gauge who Zouken truly is, because we only got the latter half of it to begin with. But from everything that I saw in general, this is an evil man, no holds barred. You know it's bad when I can compare you to an actual natural born psychopath, and somehow the psychopath has more empathy than you as a character. That's utterly insane. I mean, Tsiah is the same person that wanted to get rid of his daughter on a logical level because he knew he would bring misfortune to her in some way. You know what Zouken is doing with his family? He's throwing them down into the worm pit and watching them get ate alive. But I'm not gonna take the wheel by myself. We're gonna get into some of these comments. The first one: fuck Zouken, all my homies hate Zouken, even himself. What can I say? And this is just the con of having this worm body, that Zouken was disgusted with the way that he was. Like, bump what everybody else thinks about him, he doesn't like what he's become. So why should anybody else? The next one: I mean, as an antagonist, he does his job well enough, so I certainly can't say he's poorly written or executed. But when your competition as an antagonist is Gil and Tsiah, you've got no chance. I don't think it's even worth comparing Zouken to Gil and Tsiah. They are extreme focal points in both stories. Not just Stay Night, but Zero too. There's a point where all you're getting is Tsiah and Gil. But I will say that it's impressive on Zouken's behalf that he doesn't get a tenth of their screen time and still manages to be just as interesting and also just as much as a threat. Sometimes even worse. The next one: he unfortunately had the Herculean task of retaining his own love to hate appeal in a series involving Shinji. And I just went over that. I would never say that Shinji is as sick as Zouken, because Zouken performed those things because he wanted to do them. Shinji was birthed into ruin, the same way that Shiro was nearly birthed into ruin, losing his parents when he was just a child. The next one: he's okay. The threatening presence he gives off early on is for sure the best part of him though. The tragedy part of him losing his memory of his original goal is just done way better by Darius and Prisma Ilya. Exactly. And this is another big key point in what I was saying about we don't know Zouken's past. Some of the most recent arcs of Prisma Ilya shows us that Darius wasn't always like this. Above all, he's never been a predator as far as we know. So the whole wanting to rule the world and be God and all of that, that's normal, that's casual. The way that he brought it together was compelling because not everybody scopes it in the way that he did, but everything else is regular. You can rock with that. It's like, okay, I get it. I think Darius is one of the best antagonists in the verse. If you've been through Prisma, you already know what it is. The next one, and you can tell this dude likes to talk because he's yapping. I think people undersell his character, and I don't really agree with the idea of him not being complex. Yeah, him not being complex is ridiculous. That's actually foolish. I can't believe the other dude even said that. I felt like the VN spelt it out very clearly, yet a lot of people still have the irony of his motivations fly over their head. They focus too much on the wanting to be immortal thing and miss out on how his original motivations were a lot more human. Okay, here we go. I'm gonna stop you right there. I don't give a damn what your motivation is if you end up like this. It doesn't matter, because as far as we know, there was nothing wrong with Zouken. So he really desired to do those things and had a choice to not do them and still did it. He didn't even come close. It's not like we see Zouken helping people when he was younger along the way or finding other things that he could have did to expedite the process. We only see him being evil all the time. So until that changes, that's just his truth. While the Ironsburns and the Tosakas desired the Grail for their own magecraft related obsessions, Zouken was the one who became the most monstrous. But originally, he had the most positive reasons for it. He wanted to keep living not for the sake of it, but so that he could achieve their dream of reaching the third magic to make sure that Justice's death would have meaning. But the pain of the continued living made him forget that goal, and that made one of the most most empathetic head of the families into the absolute worst one. I will say that most people don't know Zouken's original intentions, and that's a very important thing to factor into his character. Does it matter at this point? Not really. It's just plain sad to see how he treats Karya when he very likely would have empathized a lot with him were he sane. Again, fuck Karya. But realistically, Karya's a victim too of being under Zouken. Regardless of how I feel about it, that's just true. Do I think he's still a hoe? Absolutely. And I think his death scene in Heaven's Field is really the best way that they could have concluded the Holy Grail War. It was a great send-off to that original great mystery that kicked off this wide-ranging franchise. And it was really Zouken's story that wrapped up the bow on it so neatly. I disagree with that entirely. A lot of those things about Zouken is hidden. As a matter of fact, even the part about him being with Justice and how they met up, that didn't come out until several years later in the manga. But originally, things like that were only in the materials. You had to read the materials to understand this character. So I don't understand how the VN could wrap it up neatly if it doesn't even tell you who he is entirely as a person to begin with. You need to go around and collect all the Dragon Balls to completely understand his character. And while that is fun to do, it's a disservice to him because without doing that research or having somebody tell you about these extra things, as I mentioned before, you couldn't even gauge his character properly. And that's a problem with not just him, but a lot of characters in this verse. Everybody thinks they know the whole story, and they don't. Everybody really thinks they know these characters because they watch these 5 to 10 minute videos. That's why I always hammer down, hey man, I love doing this content and putting people on, but please go back and look into something. You don't even gotta read it, just look into something, because that is not the whole thing. And like somebody said on another video, the very fact that we're bringing up this character 20 years later, because we didn't have to talk about Zouken, there's a lot of characters that we can talk about, and this thread got so much attention on it still, should let you know that he's a good character. Should let you know that he's a complex individual, and he is in fact underappreciated, whether you agree with his memes or not.